Hello and welcome to Express Sports Podcast. You're listening to Game Time with me, Mihir Vasavda. Joining me as always is Rahul Pandey and also is Shivani Naik. Today we'll be celebrating the life and times of one of Indian sports' real heroes, legend of Indian basketball, a former India captain, an Arjuna awardee, an Asian all-star. Abbas Moontasir was all this and a lot more. He died recently, and in her orbit, Shivani described him as an Indian legend and one of the finest to come out from Nagpada, which is an incredible place. I mean, Shivani wouldn't be wrong to call it the home of Indian basketball, one of the homes of Indian basketball, but surely the home of basketball in Mumbai.
Absolutely, it's the spiritual home of basketball, and the bouncing of the ball sounds different there. So yeah.
I'm sure. I guess all of us who have cut our teeth reporting in Mumbai have at least once visited the Nagpada courts. Shivani has done that more than once. I certainly have gone there just once in my entire life to Nagpada. Should have done more now when I think of it. But Shivani, I mean, talking about Abbas Muntasir, just a quick recap. He was 80 when he died on November 17th of respiratory problems. Shivani, his life is it's almost a film story जैसी कहानी एक हो जाती है नहीं? Where do you even begin to talk about what he's done for Indian basketball, not just as a player, but also in his post-playing days? An India captain, but these tags, captain and titles and number of records and the stats that go along with Abbas Moontasir, they don't really justify what kind of a legend he is, right? What made him so special?
I would call him like the greatest character in Indian basketball. And when you get into sports journalism, obviously there are big stars and there are legends of different sports that you hope that you get to interview someday. And I was not aware of Abbas Moontasir, or Abbasi as he was called, before I actually went to Nagpada, though he was a legend of the game. And I consider it, I think, my career's funnest interview and interaction that I've had with an athlete, with a sports person. And I absolutely loved him as an ex-sports person. He was a total character. He loved talking about the sport, and that is what a young reporter looks for, when you start out. He talked basketball. He loved it. He lived it. Of course, he was India's captain in 1975 when India had its best finish at the ABC, the Asian basketball competition. But yeah, more than that, it was just the excitement that he got to a basketball court, whether it was as a player, which we haven't watched, or it was as a mere spectator or an expert sitting in the stands.
Shivani, you've used the word character, and when anyone reads your orbit on him, they certainly find out why you have used that term particularly. But, I always love to look at the beginnings of an athlete's journey, where they come from and how that has helped shaping their character over the longer term. When you talk about Abbas Moontasir, who was born to a carpet merchant of Iranian lineage at the Mustafa Manzil in Nagpada, which, as you have said, Mumbai's basketball spiritual home. What are the story nuggets, or what are the character traits early in his story that shaped his journey to become the character that you're talking about?
So most of the players that I spoke to after his demise said that his story started and ended at Mustafa Manzil. So this is a sort of a tall building with lovely filigreed balconies, and that place has character as well. Okay, it overlooks a basketball court. The predominant court of Nagpada or of central Mumbai was basically the YMCA courts. Okay, that's where the visiting Americans would start bouncing the ball, and they would play ball there. So the entire story of Nagpada basketball began at the Mastan YMCA courts. And Nagpada had this very, very famous coach called Bachu Bhai, okay? Yusuf was his actual name, but he was known as Bachu Bhai always. And he was a very, very strict coach, somebody who was a stickler for rules. He was absolutely strict with his wards, with people who came to train under him. And it was just the same characteristics or the traits that Bachu Bhai had that Abbasi inherited. It was always about playing the game very, very hard, but very, very fair. And that's how the whole thing came about. And Nagpada has close to, I think, some 10 internationals. So it's smallish area in central Mumbai, but a lot of international basketball players came from there. Now you have to remember that we're talking about the late 60s, early 70s, which was a time when India did have basketball, okay? We had, so the services teams were the biggest teams, and there was the railways teams, mostly comprising players from the north, from Punjab, from Haryana, from Rajasthan, which was a major center. And these were tall guys who joined, let's say, the army or the air force, and then picked up basketball. They were put into the sport after they joined the army. So they had a very, very rigid sort of understanding of the sport. But the Nagpada boys, though they were not blessed with height, were not blessed with the vertical advantage, they picked the sport very, very early. It came as like as an extension of their palms to them. The ball was literally like an extension of their palms. They played the creative game. They also had a lot of street smarts when they played. So it was also a very, very vocal, chirpy game. So that is the sort of background that Abbas Moontasir grew up in. And this was the Bombay style of basketball. You have to also remember that Nagpada wasn't the only place where basketball thrived in Bombay. There was also Matunga, which had the famous Ramu Memorial Tournament of Mumbai. So lots of players who came from Kerala and Tamil Nadu and settled in Matunga. So that was another another style of play in Bombay. And together, I think Nagpada and Matunga, they produced some of the best basketball that Bombay saw.
Fascinating. And it's not the only thing which is fascinating in your story, isn't it? He played at a time when cricket and hockey were popular. I think it's also important for a player, no matter which generation, as I see, the impact that they have on people watching them or the number of people they draw to their sport. What was it about him that, made people flock to watch him from all over India? You mentioned another line in your piece, which I think plays a part in it. Before Hulk and Amitabh Bachchan, there was playmaker Abbas Moontasir on basketball courts. What did that have to do with this effect on the people who watched him as this spotlight player and just were really interested in seeing what he had to say or do on the court?
Okay, again, I'll jog it back to, let's say, the 40s and 50s. You have to understand that India was like an absolute super powerhouse in hockey at that point in time. And athletes, generally, even the non-cricket athletes, they had that swag, okay? They had that pride in playing a sport which was not cricket. They did not really view themselves as playing a sport that is not mainstream. Also, cricket wasn't that massive at that point in time. So there was a sort of a parity, and they took great pride in representing India, but they also took great pride in representing their localities or in playing domestic tournaments. And which is why a lot of people actually watched basketball at Nagpada, okay? You have to literally understand it's just a court, okay? It's a court with temporary seating, 3 tiers, and I don't mean tiers in the sense of stadium tiers, but just like 3 benches at different levels. But there would be thousands who actually, thousands might be an exaggeration, but hundreds who got into that very, very tiny space and watched these people play. It makes it a very, very intimate atmosphere for basketball players, where the crowds as well, the crowds thought it absolutely all right to pass comments and to teach a player, even of Abbasi's repute, on how to play. And so there was this back and forth that would go on, between the crowds and the players. And the crowds would obviously, that version of trolling or whatever was prevalent at that point in time. And they would say something funny and the players would respond with something that was equally witty. So that's how That's how sport was played at that point in time. And you had the big teams, you had IOB from the south, you had Punjab Police, you had the services, of course, and then railways grew. Abbas Moontasir was very, very fundamental to the growth of the railways team, which went on to win like multiple times. But the one thing that he brought to the sport was also this absolute attitude of a small player in a tall game. Okay, he wasn't the tallest, and that never deterred him from either playing defensively. He was perhaps India's greatest defensive player at one point in time. He was also a playmaker who was known for those no-see passes and for taking on the tall centers of, let's say, services or the Punjab team and besting them as well. And while he did all this, he was very quick on his feet. So there was a sort of a whiz about him on the court. He would be like a blur and he would be everywhere at the same time. And then he would also be very chatty and he would point out to the referees what the rules are, which is what the crowds really came for. They literally came to watch him take on the referees, because the referees would be like whistling away and he would be like shouting on top of his voice and drowning their whistles, and the crowds would start whistling. So it was that sort of a atmosphere.
It's through and through Nagpada, right? I mean, Shivani, you do wonder because you described the two parallel basketball cultures in Bombay. I guess it was in existence till as recently, until a decade ago, where you'd see a more, for the lack of a better word, sophisticated crowd, perhaps at Indian Gymkhana in Matunga, where you had the Ramu Memorial and the other things. And then you had a completely different world at Nagpada. I mean, from the type of players to the kind of language that was spoken, and not in a bad way, but it just added a lot of color to the sport.
Yeah, it was totally Bombaya. It was totally the things that there was no division, there was no gap between the players and the crowds, because the players came from that very vicinity, from that crowd. They were drawn from that milieu. So yeah, it was friendly. It could also get very, very snarky, and yeah.
My first assignment, as a cub reporter, I was interning at Hindustan Times, and the first time I actually saw live sport was basketball, the Ramu Memorial, where I saw Mastan YMCA play, and I was completely blown with the kind of stuff that was being said on court. And I remember I went back to office and I said, "Here, look, kya language use kar raha hai? I think वही story hai."
No, absolutely. I remember there used to be like a services coach, and the thing is, everyone in India loved coming to Nagpada because the crowd, besides the idle chatter that went on, they knew the game. Okay, they appreciated a good game. They could also tell a player where he was going wrong. So there were simultaneously like 100 coaches there, and there was a services coach who would go bal ke piche bhag, and they would sort of imitate him. And you have to understand that army guys are not, they are taught to not get provoked and hit back, but Nagpada crowd managed to get like a smile out of him. And plus he could blend into that crowd as well. He would educate anyone who was sitting next to him on the intricacies of the game.
No, I mean, the neighborhood shaped him totally as a player, no? I mean, you talk about all his dribbling and his running around. There was also the Abbas jump that you talk about. He also earned a very famous fan in Tom Alter, I guess one of the many followers, fans that he had. But just how much of a role did Nagpada play in him, making him a player that he was? I mean, I guess he would have been a totally different person if he was just 10 kilometers further north in Matunga playing at the Indian Gymkhana courts, I guess.
Totally. Like I mentioned before, see, height it's an undeniable fact in basketball, okay? So when you send like a small guy there, and by small I mean he must have been 5'11" or something, but the big guys there at that point in time, Khushiram was like a legend of Indian basketball. He was about 6'5", I guess, in the 50s. So the entire bunch that kind of comprised the Indian team, before Abbasi got into that team, there would be like 4 very, very tall guys, and probably one playmaker who was also thereabouts. So for somebody who knew that he isn't tall, he had to devise means to counter, whether in defense, in offense, to catch those rebounds. And that is what pushed him to develop his game, pushed him to develop a jump that could tap the ball away from the centers. So you learn a lot of new things because you know that you are not as tall as them and you can't just, flap around your arms and get baskets in or, tap away the rebounds. So that's how I think he sort of, developed his game.
Indeed. I think, a lot of hard work would have went into that journey. So far, the things that we have covered, of course, only help me in knowing that if I would have known this story early in my school days, I probably wouldn't have wasted a couple of years trying to get into basketball just because my height was beyond the 6 foot mark. Yeah, so a lot of technique is required in the sport, but there was also a certain amount of knowledge as far as the sport was concerned that he held. And, that knowledge came into play in trolling the referees or correcting the referees on court as well. He once went to great lengths to explain a game violation to a ref, asked him to recall which shoulder had dipped when it came to, as far as a player's feet upon landing was concerned. And the referee, of course, was taken aback by his knowledge then and there. But he would say there are rules and they must be obeyed. And as you so rightly put it, those remarks were put in the colorful Central Bombay language. But those antiques with the referees land him into trouble? I think they did. And, he was also banned as well. What happened there?
See, there are people who have problems with authority, and he certainly was one of them. But he always had a point, which was the reason why the referees eventually respected him. Thing is, he did not like unfairness. He did not like the power that referees wielded with just that whistle. And he thought that he played absolutely hard and he played it fair. So there was no reason why a referee should ruin, one, the flow of play, and two, give decisions just because, he can. And that was a huge thing. Now, most players would just put their head down and carry on with the game. But Abbasi was never going to take a decision sort of lying down. For him, again, whether it was the taller players or whether it was the referees, if he thought that a decision was wrong, he would walk up to them, first try to sort of reason it out with them. But that obviously never worked because, a referee is never going to listen to a player. And then obviously there'd be raised voices and he would tell them exactly what he thought of them and get banned as well. And would miss out on a lot of international tournaments because of that. Again, I go back to what the Indian team used to look like at that point in time. It was dominated by the services which believe in discipline, which are not very, very open to character who's like, just do his own thing. And so discipline was very, very was very, very central to Indian teams as well. So not too many coaches would also want somebody who is so mercurial. But everyone respected him. The administrators respected him. They intervened to sort of, get him back into the teams. His teammates loved him, though he made them work really, really hard and he slaved them out. But the thing is, the referees could call the shots and they could ban him. So he did get banned and miss out on at least a couple of, I think, ABCs at that point in time. Though by the time I think Moscow rolled in, the Moscow Olympics, he was old, so he wouldn't have made the team. And also, Ajmer Singh and Hanuman Singh, considered probably the greatest combine in Indian basketball, they took over from him. Ajmer Singh was the tall center and Hanuman was the playmaker who learned a lot of things from Abbasi at Railways, and then it was that generation after him. So basically, he went out absolutely fighting and he was dragged out kicking his legs because the thing is, he knew he was a good player, okay? He knew he was better than a lot of other players and there was no reason to keep him away from the team. He could not understand why mere matter or a small matter like discipline should not even discipline, just speaking his mind should keep him away from the team. So he fought for his selections as well. And he succeeded at times and he didn't at others.
Yeah, and this incident that you mentioned where he fought for his selection and this one time where he succeeded quite extraordinarily was in 1975 at the Asian Championship. There's this wonderful story of in the lead up to that event. The Ministry of Education, actually I didn't know, Shivani, that Ministry of Education was overseeing the sport in the country back then. So they told the Basketball Federation कि आप अगर जो जा रहे हो तो you have to ensure a top 4 finish. The tournament was in Bangkok. And the federation tried to look at young players. They did not invite Muntasir, who was 33. Muntasir being Muntasir, he asked them कि भाई क्यों नहीं ले रहे हो? And he was told कि आपकी उम्र नहीं रही है, you're quite old to play. He told the federation guys कि look, Pele was 30 when he played the 1970 World Cup. And the federation official looked up at him and said कि do you think you're Pele? And he said कि no, I'm not. But others aren't Jerzinos as well. So he went. He went there and he ensured India finished in top 4. This story was published in the Illustrated Weekly of India. Very beautiful recollection of what the man was. But Shivani, he didn't play long after that internationally. He continued to play for Central Airways till he was 40, I guess. After playing career, what was his role? What was his contribution?
He coached the Railways for a bit. He could coach any team. That was the beauty of Abbasi. He loved coaching under 13s. He liked being on the basketball court. He knew the sport. He would often be invited to watch the games that Nagpada hosted. Nagpada was a huge center which hosted, I think, a couple of tournaments. They also hosted a monsoon basketball league, which was very similar to the Kanga League. Because he thought that nothing can stop, not even the Mumbai rains can stop basketball. So Nagpada was also crazy that way. And he would come and watch young players. He would give his opinions on the subsequent Indian teams. And he was never happy with any Indian player because he thought that they could always improve and there always was scope for improvement. But he would tell the coaches what he thought of the players, and then he would tell the players as well. I think in all my years of watching him watch basketball, I don't remember anyone who talked back to him, or who said that, nahi bhaiya, aap galat bol rahe ho. People always took his advice. He always knew what is to be told to a player to make him better, even if it was harsh and blunt. And players, I think, appreciated his honesty. So he was always the person whose approval they would want. And even if they never got it, the feedback was always welcome.
Yeah, that is indeed some legacy to have, Shivani, isn't it? You've spoken to his junior, you've spoken to a lot of players, I'm sure, who knew him, who knew his demeanor, who knew the way he played the game and, what he meant to it. What do you think will be Abbas Moontasir's legacy when it comes to Indian basketball or Indian sport?
So, he would always address people as kya dushman kaisa hai tu? And that dushman was always because he thought that you are incomplete in basketball because you don't know enough about it. That was always like the preamble to any conversation that he had with anyone. Now, you could be like India's captain, you could be anyone. And it was always dushman for him because he thought that not everyone has, or frankly, nobody has actually mastered the game, and which was true as well. So I think his legacy will always be the scope of improvement that every player will keep on the perch and hope to sort of improve. Because Abbasi was always about like improving constantly, no matter where you reached. And the thing is, India did not really reach great heights. They did lose to China, Korea, and I think Japan, even in that 1975 tournament. He always would say that in basketball, players will remember their losses far more than their wins, and they'll remember the missed baskets much more than even the wins, even the national wins. So there was a sort of philosophical way in which he looked at basketball as well. It was never a completed journey. It was always the things that you could improve on. And to those that he coached or those that he met, that's the one thing that they'll always remember. They'll remember what their shortcomings were, but they'll always appreciate him for pointing it out and improving them.
Lovely. I don't think there could be a better way to sum up the person that he was. Also, like you'd mentioned in his piece, Shivani, of course, his style, his on-court style, off-court style, the pink shirts, everything. There's so much to talk about this man. We can go on and on, but hopefully there'll be someone who will be inspired by his life and times and take Indian basketball to some heights in the future. Shivani, thanks a lot for joining us and taking us through the life of Abbas Moontasir and also making us, enlightening us with the kind of contribution he's made to Indian sport. It was great listening to his story, and thank you all for listening.
Oh, he loved Tutti Frutti ice cream. So for anyone who wants to celebrate the life and times of Abbas Moontasir, they should eat Tutti Frutti ice cream.
And there couldn't be a better way to spend the weekend, or if you're listening in the weekday, well, there's no bad timing for ice cream, and Tutti Frutti ice cream especially. So take Tutti Frutti ice cream Abbas Moontasir ke naam. We'll be back next week.
You were listening to Express Podcasts. Today's show was edited and mixed by Abhishek Kumar and produced by me, Anwiti Singh. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.